All right, thank you, Dave. So those of you that know him, we affectionately call him Aussie Dave. Okay, so that is Aussie Dave, one of our elders, and thankful to have him on our elder team. So you can take your Bibles and turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17, and while you're turning there, let me say a word about the sabbatical. And just to reaffirm what Dave has said, I am not on the edge of burning out. Okay, I appreciate that once this sabbatical was announced a few weeks ago, that I've had more than one person, I've had a few of you just reach out, hey, is everything okay? Like, do you need anything? Are you all right? And I appreciate it. I'm not on the edge of burning out. We're not on the edge of, stepping away from everything. Building campaigns, certainly can be stressful, but I don't feel undue stress from that either. In fact, when this campaign started, when we started to work on this, the building itself, the elders saw to it to free up some of my other responsibilities, and other folks stepped in so that my primary responsibility would just be teaching and then kind of helping oversee the building itself. So I don't feel stressed out by that. I'm not nervous as we step away about the building project as well, because we have really a small dream team of people who are incredibly, incredibly gifted in this area. Chad Hester, Mike Eiler, and Craig Rosenkrantz, and then myself. And you talk about like imposter syndrome when we sit in those meetings, like they're all talking and I'm just nodding my head and Googling terms so that I can kind of like go along with them and be like, oh yeah, right, yeah, no, the fascia, yeah, right, yeah, exactly. And so we are very blessed here, okay? And those guys are a bunch of all-stars. And when I'm gone for a month, the building project won't miss a beat. And the staff that we have here that run so many other things, they're incredibly gifted by God, and they are going to do a great job. This has been in the works for about a year, and I do appreciate how many of you have reached out. Sometimes pastoring can be a lonely job if you ask pastors in general, okay? But I want to say that it has never been a lonely job here at the Dove. It's never been a lonely job for myself and for my wife. We've never felt alone or isolated. The fact that so many of you reach out to just check, hey, is everything okay? You're stepping away for a little bit. Is everything all right? I mean, you guys, we have great friends here. We have deep roots, okay? And we are blessed. I also want to say that I know that many of you have stressful jobs and you have stressful lives and you will never get a sabbatical. Okay, I know that and I understand that. So I do understand also it is a great privilege that I've been given by you, the church, and by the grace of God, I don't plan to waste it. Okay, I've got the sabbatical divided into 3 categories. The first category is rest from the day-to-day pastoral ministry. As part of that sabbatical, even I've told Ginger that I'm taking a 30-day rest from making our bed. Okay, and she said, "Oh, so you're sleeping on the couch for 30 days?" So pray for Ginger's heart. Okay, pray for her. Okay, we're working on it, all right? So she didn't buy it. So part of that sabbatical is rest. That's part of the point of that. And then a second category is vision for the future, okay, 2024 and beyond. Okay, we're going to have a new building. That's great. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to use it on mission? How are we going to continue to spread the gospel here locally and even further? So I want to spend some time really thinking that through, and not having the day-to-day stuff allows you to kind of step back and kind of do some big planning. And so that's the second part of my goal for the sabbatical is that. And then thirdly is study. I hope to get deep into study for 2 new series that will come up right when I come back. And so that's my plan, Lord willing. And so seriously, thank you. And from Ginger, thank you for this. And we want to use it. And we want to use it and come back ready to continue and just dig in for another 7 years by the grace of God, right? So since it starts in 2 weeks, I'll be preaching today and then next week. Since it starts in 2 weeks, rather than start another series and then take a month off, I thought it would be fun to teach through a text that I love, but I've never really, I don't know that I've preached through this text fully ever at the Dove. And so that's the story of David and Goliath. It's 1 Samuel 17, okay? Over the past few years, I've referred to it in other sermons or alluded to it, but I thought, man, this would be kind of fun. Let's work through the entire text today. It is perhaps the most famous story in all of the Bible. It's at least up there with Noah's Ark and Jonah and the great fish, or Jonah and the whale, as people call it. It's so well known that it's actually entrenched in our pop culture, especially in the realm of sports. Any time a team is up against a much better team, This is a David and Goliath story. This is a David and Goliath matchup. So it is kind of part of pop culture. Best-selling author Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book titled David and Goliath, Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. It is a very good book. I would commend it to you. It is a book that looks at some of the greatest perceived underdogs in history and how they slew the giants of their time. It is a good book. It's worth your time. But I do want to say he, like many people, misses the point of the text of David and Goliath. Okay? And all too often, even in church, we miss the point of the text. And well, what do you mean by that? Well, we tend to, and teachers tend to, approach this passage and others like it as if they're simply there to teach us a moral lesson. Like it's a lesson in self-help. Okay, a short story that's intended to make you a better person. So I'm going to ask you, church, what is the giant in your life that you need to slay today? Because I see some giant slayers in this church today. And if you're with me, would you say an amen? You're not supposed to say amen. That was a test. Man. And you don't know it yet, but I'm here to tell you that you just need to take the 5 smooth stones of, forget the fact, by the way, that it just took 1 stone. Okay, like that never, but there's 5 stones of, slaying the giant of weight loss in your life. And the first stone is the stone of loving yourself more. And the second stone is believing in yourself. And the third stone is the carnivore diet. Okay? And the fourth stone is believing in God, because we got to put that in there somewhere. And the 5th stone is those Ozempic shots, because, those things work, okay? Like, let's be honest about it, all right? And so, just to quote that famous philosopher, Michael Scott, no. Listen to me. There are secondary applications from this text that can be made. And if you broke it down for several weeks, you could look at some of that. But God did not give us the story of David and Goliath to teach us how to be giant killers, to teach us how to slay the giant of weight loss or the giant of debt. There is a much greater and deeper and richer and more fulfilling point to this great story. And my prayer is that you'll see David versus Goliath for what it truly is today. So we're going to read through really most of chapter 17. And what I want us to do is kind of put like our kid glasses on. Okay, like read it like it's the first time. So open 1 Samuel 17, and maybe it is the first time for you. That's great. You're already ahead of us, okay? But I want to put our kid glasses on. Let's read it like it's the first time, because I think we need something we understand is we don't grasp some of these well-known stories like we think we do. Because we're like, well, I've already heard that story. I know that story. We kind of skim through it. And so we're going to take some time to read it, but just a little context, okay? Israel was once a theocracy. They were once ruled directly by God, and God spoke to them and led them through the prophets. But coming into 1 Samuel 17, they are now a monarchy. Okay, so God had been their king, but being weak and easily influenced like they were, they wanted a king like all the other countries had. Okay, this was a direct offense to Yahweh who had ruled them. Okay? The prophet Samuel was enraged by this, and so in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 7, the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people. Isn't that interesting? Because they're not obeying the voice of God. Obey the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, they have rejected me from being king over them. Okay, so as chapter 17 starts, understand that context. Israel has rejected God as king. We want a king like everybody else has. Give us somebody like that we can look up to and bow down to. And so Israel has their king. But you're going to see he kind of ends up being worthless. Look at chapter 17, verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Soko and Azekah and Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. His shield bearer went before him, and he stood, and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves. Let him come down to me. If he is able to fight me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you'll be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and they were greatly afraid. We'll stop there for right now. So in 1 Samuel 17, Israel has their first king. It's King Saul. And everything is already a mess. He, from an outward human perspective, visibly, he looked like a good candidate from appearance. He is described in 1 Samuel as being head and shoulders taller than the rest of the men of Israel. Okay, so he looked the part of a king, of a warrior, of somebody you would follow in battle, of somebody to lead your nation. He looked the part, but his heart, his character was incredibly lacking. And as chapter 17 begins, we find out that Israel's in trouble. Their longtime enemy, the Philistines, they have gathered their army for battle, and they were warriors. They were more of a warrior people, and they were well armed. The valley of Elah, the forces of Israel, they're on one side. The superior forces of the Philistines are on the other. They are separated by a ravine that has water running down through it. This is a famous historic place for battle in history, both in the Maccabean Wars with Syria and also even in the Crusades. And in his book, Gladwell kind of talks about that a little bit. In our text, they're on separate sides of this valley, right? And they're taunting each other. This is like, for those of you like that grew up in the 70s and 80s, this is like a giant game of Red Rover, okay? For those of you, like you kids here, I want to tell you something, like your parents went hard in recess in the 70s and 80s, okay? I realize now that recess is everyone sits in a circle and talks about their feelings, okay, but that's not how it was in the 70s and 80s. And by the way, for you kids, that ain't your fault. Ain't your fault. It's like lawyers and safety first and all this stuff, okay? But in the 70s and 80s, we played this game called Red Rover. And what it was is you would divide your class into two lines and you would lock hands. And then one line would taunt the other side and call somebody Red Rover, send Stover right over, which was a really tough name for that game, by the way, okay? We're still bitter about that. And then that person would run across and you would try to break through the line. And we're talking broken wrists and bruised ribs. My buddies and I realized that if we waited till the last second when somebody tried to break through, if we raised our arms, we would clothesline them, okay? And so I'm going to tell you this, third grade Red Rover, it went hard, okay? And that's kind of what it is here. We got them on both sides of this valley. They're taunting each other. They're yelling at each other. They're making gestures and saying things. The armies of Israel and Philistia have taken up positions. They are opposite each other. The Philistines are Israel's nemesis. They continue to rape and to pillage Israel. If their forces weren't daunting enough on this day, they see on the other side there in the forces of Philistia that movement is happening. And as the forces divide, to Israel's amazement and horror, verse 4, there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He is a giant who is nearly 10 feet tall. I mean, what kind of monstrosity is this for the Israelites? To give you a perspective, the average height of an Israeli man was somewhere around 5.5 feet at this time. So Goliath is nearly twice as tall as any Israelite man. And Israel's never seen anything like him. He is strong enough to be a warrior who wears armor that weighs upwards or over 125 pounds. The tip of his spear alone was 15 pounds. He had a helmet of bronze. He had chain mail layered like fish scales. Even his legs were covered in armor. And he had an armor bearer that carried a shield that was nearly his height that stood in front of him. All of this armor and this weaponry and technology would have been unusual at this time. He would have likely been the only Philistine, even for people that are warriors, that are decked out like this. He is their great secret weapon. We're talking that these are mostly farmers and fishermen who've been called to fight. So not only is this champion larger than life, his armor is larger than life. It is made from the greatest technology and the strongest material of the day. And his voice, as he cries out to Israel across the valley, must have just carried through the entire valley. And he offers a proposal, a battle of representatives. You send your best against our best. And here I stand as the Philistines' best, and now send out your best. Verse 9, he says, look, and if I win, or if your guy wins, he'll be we'll be his servants. And if I win, you'll be our servants. How about that for a deal? Goliath was offering single combat, winner take all. It was sometimes used in those days as a way to spare many lives, perhaps also as a way to determine the will of the gods. Because, hey, let's do it one-on-one and let's see what God wills. Here's the thing, though, from a human perspective. Goliath is a champion. This is his wheelhouse. We'll find later that he has been raised from his youth to fight like this. All of his life, he has trained for moments like these. And on top of that, he's out here and he's cursing the one true God. It's not just Israel he defies. He defies Yahweh. And so this begs the question then, if you're Israel, who could stand before him? Who could stand before him and represent Israel and take this giant head on who is defying the armies of the living God? Which brings us back to King Saul. Israel had wanted a king for moments just like this. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 20, we're told this. Why do they want it? That we also may be like all the nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Where's your king now, Israel? Where's he at? They didn't want God fighting their battles. They wanted a king. Saul was the king they thought they always wanted. In him, they had a king who was probably, because we're told that he was head and shoulders taller than the rest of the Israelite men, he's probably 6.5 feet tall. He's a small giant in his own right, okay? He's always been the biggest, baddest dude in the room, okay? That's who Saul is. With the best armor of the day. He is the obvious choice. And a day like today is the very reason that they would choose him as king. And he is nowhere to be found. He is equipped, he is trained, he is up for the task, but instead of leading, instead of fighting for his people, instead of believing in the one true God, instead of defending the honor of the Lord that Goliath curses and defies, Saul is missing in action. Saul looks the part, but his character is greatly lacking. So much so that God has already rejected Saul as king, and he has anointed another to be king. And that anointed one is the David we're about to read. Look at verse 12. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse, and he had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. Verse 17, Jesse said to David his son, take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers, and also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well and bring some token from them. Verse 19, now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines, and David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with the keeper and took the provisions and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. Verse 22, and David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, and he ran to the ranks, and he went and greeted his brothers. And as he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. Verse 24, all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, they fled from him. They were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel, and the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. So the king, nobody wants to fight Goliath, so much so that he offers great riches, the princess as your wife, and tax-free for the rest of your life, and nobody wants it. Nobody. Verse 26, and David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in the same way, so shall it be done to the man who kills him. Verse 28, now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. want you to remember that here in a second. And he said, why have you come down? And with you have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? He's degrading David's job and the role that he has. I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, like, typical brother, like, what have I done? Like, was it just not a word? Like, didn't I just ask a question? Like, why are you doing this? And he turned away from him toward another, and he spoke in the same way. And all the people answered him again as before. So verse 12, this young man, David, enters the picture. He's probably somewhere around 16 years of age. He's the youngest of 8 brothers, 3 of whom of these brothers have followed Saul into battle. But 20 years of age was the fighting age in Israel. So David's below that. David is a young man. He is not ready for war. He is a shepherd boy. But like many boys, of course, he is intrigued by the idea of war, and he takes any chance to see the goings on. So Jesse, his father, gives him the task of bringing grain and bread and cheese. They were each responsible for their own food. So he brings that food to his brothers. And as he rises that morning, he has no idea the giant that he is about to face. He has no idea that his faith would be tested like never before. He has no idea that his life will forever change on this day. But something else about David, and it's the context, and something we forget if we just pull chapter 17 and rip it out. Turn back one chapter to chapter 16. God has rejected Saul, and he sent the prophet Samuel to anoint a new king. And he sends him to this man named Jesse, who is very old in years, and this man has 8 sons. And immediately the prophet Samuel is drawn to the oldest, who is a physical specimen. And his name is Eliab, the same Eliab that's upset in chapter 17. If anyone looks like a king, it's Eliab. And so Samuel the prophet immediately is drawn to Eliab. But chapter 16, verse 6, when they came, he looked on Eliab and he thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. This is the one. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. So David is anointed that day as the next king of Israel, but David was Samuel's last choice. David was everyone's last choice, but he was God's first choice because of the character and the heart that he had, a heart of worship and heart that was devoted to the one true God. You see, listen, mankind looks on the outward appearance. We are attracted to bravado and jawlines and biceps and wingspan and dudes that don't skip leg day. That's what we're attracted to, but God looks on the heart. This is reassuring, and it's convicting. It's reassuring because God sees what others don't. He sees the love that you have, the worry, the character, the value. He loves you. He sees the work that you do that never gets praised, that goes unnoticed. He sees your real intentions. It's encouraging that God looks on the heart. It's also convicting. Why? Because God sees the heart. Like he sees your heart, all of it. And you may have the picture-perfect social media presence, and that's what everyone else sees. But God sees what you think. He sees what you obsess over. He sees the way you treat your spouse when no one is around. He sees your worst thoughts. Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. David is a man after God's own heart, so he stands out from all of the rest of the crowd. All of the Israelites, the Philistines, Saul, and Goliath. They all see the situation one way. They look at the outward appearance. He is a giant. He is a warrior. The day is done. We are all ruined. They're looking at it from the ground level, from a human perspective. There is no way from a human perspective that we can defeat this giant. But what does David see? What does he see? He sees someone who's defying and cursing the living God. He doesn't see a giant who can't be defeated. He sees a head that is so big that it cannot be missed. Oh, boy's like, dude, I was killing prairie dogs from 40 yards. Look at the noggin on that dude. Are you kidding me? Everyone else is dismayed and terrified, but David is courageous. But it's not because of self-esteem. It's not because he got up that morning, looked in the mirror, put some water in his face, was like, hey, you are somebody, bro. Okay, like, you are special. You are kind. He sees things through the right lens, and I'll show you the proof of that in a second. When David intervenes here, though, this is what you need to understand. He does not intervene as a young boy who doesn't know his place. He does not intervene as a young boy who's never taken a loss. He is intervening as the newly anointed coming king of Israel. When Samuel anointed him in chapter 16, we're told the Spirit of God filled him. David thinks these things about being a king and won't take place for some time. But on this day, what just starts out as an ordinary day, God has other plans. And as David gets to the field of battle, he sees Israel, his people. But like now he's anointed also his people. He sees them. And to a man, they're scared and they're helpless and their king is worthless and they're scattered and they're shaking, right? They're like sheep who have no shepherd. And David cannot help but act. His heart is already for his people. This was God's calling on his life. I want you to understand, it's the first glimpse here that David is an Old Testament Christ figure. When Jesus saw the crowds, he was moved with compassion. They were sheep who had no shepherd, and Jesus was the good shepherd. When David saw his people, they were sheep who had no shepherd, who was hiding in the tent and drinking the best wine. And David had been anointed to lead them. And so he couldn't stand still, even if it meant his life that day against that giant. So it is not ultimately an act of bravado. It is not ultimately an act of self-confidence. The only time he mentions his skill is when he's talking to Saul to convince him to let him go out there. It is an act of faith. David believes the promises of God. He is moved along by the Spirit of God, and he now believes that the timing of his anointing and this giant in front of him are not a coincidence. And because of this, he believes the giant will not stand. David is the only one to mention the living God at all in this text. Saul does one time, but it's really an empty phrase, like, hey, like God be with you, right? Like, hey, good luck with that, bro. Like, but they're all like, they think they know what's going to happen. He is the first, when he speaks in the text, he mentions God in verse 26. He is the first to speak of him. He's the only one to really speak of him in the text. And notice what he says, verse 26. Look, we serve a living God. Something that had happened previously as well is the Philistines had stolen the Ark of the Covenant, which represented the presence and the power of God, and they had put it in their temple next to Dagon, their god made of hands, or made from wood or stone. And the next morning they get there, and this great mighty statue is falling on its face before the Ark of the Covenant. David's like, there's one living God. There's one. That's it. Unlike the idols of the Philistines made from hands, you cannot make the true God. He makes you. He made all of you, and he made us. As one commentator pointed out, up until now, this narration, up to the first 20-some verses, has been godless. But David changes that. A living God won't allow this champion to curse the armies of the living God and curse the one true God and allow him to stand. If the great superpower Egypt couldn't stand before the living God, if the Red Sea couldn't stand before the living God, if the walls of Jericho couldn't stand before the living God, then this 9'9" dude with a giant head is not going to stand before the living God. Throughout the entire narrative, this is the source of David's confidence. It is not his stones, it is not his skill, it is that he serves the living God. His God is alive, and yours is too, by the way. Let me just take us through the rest of the text here and walk us through it and then finish up here. It's gripping stuff. It really is. Like the story is so powerful. I love it. Verse 31, when the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul. And Saul sent for him. So it started out in the morning to go bring his brother some cheese. Now he's standing before King Saul. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. I mean, who is this boy that is already acting like a king? He is trying to get everyone around him to not be discouraged. He sees the faces and the body language of everyone, including the king. And as he stands before the king, his first words are, don't let anybody be discouraged. Who is this boy who leads like a king already? Your servant will go out and fight this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you're not able to go out against this Philistine to fight with him. You're a youth. He's been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and I struck him and delivered out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears. And this uncircumcised Philistine, which is a great just like taunt. I like to use that against people because that is such a great way. Like this uncircumcised Philistine, like I grew up in a Christian school and they would always preach this before our big games. And so I would take it to the next level and be like, hey, let's go strike down those uncircumcised Philistines. They'd be like, be quiet, Stover. Okay, that's what they would tell me, okay? And that your servant is struck down, verse 36, both lions and bears. And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them. The only time he mentions what he's done before is to Saul. But look where his faith is. Why will he strike him down? Because David's good with a slingshot? Because David's killed a bear? No. Why? Right? He has defied the armies of the living God. David's God is alive. Verse 37, and David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, hey man, go. And the Lord be with you. Where is David's confidence? Throughout the text, David's confidence is in the God he serves. Saul doesn't get it. He's never had that type of faith. He's always been the biggest, baddest dude in the room. That's why for the first time when he comes up against somebody bigger and badder, and there is always someone bigger and badder, when he does, he backs down. Saul had never needed that type of faith. He tries to pawn off his armor on David, but it doesn't fit. It's not going to be about the armor. It's also not about the reward. That's why it's never mentioned in Gideon. David isn't like, hey, just to make sure I get the princess and tax-free for life. It's not it. It's not it for David. This is because the battle is the Lord's. Verse 40, then he took his staff. Oh boy walks out there with a staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, and he put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. I'm going to stop you there just for a second. There are a few events in history that I'd give anything to see in person, and this is one of them. Goliath's challenge has gone unanswered for 40 days. For 40 days, the ranks of the Philistines part, and this giant walks out with the greatest technological armor and weapons of his day, and his challenge goes unanswered. And every day when he steps out, the Israelites on the other side, they run away in horror. And finally, on this 40th day, the Israeli ranks part, and out steps not a king, not a warrior, but a boy with a slingshot. I would love to be there on that day. The valley is silent, but not the good kind of silent. It's the kind of silent at a party when your yee uncle has had one too many and he's about to jump the bonfire in his flip-flops. Like it's that kind of silent, right? Like get your phones out. The Israelites probably had their tablets out. They were stoned, but they probably had them out like, trying to carve like this is happening, okay? All right, so this is the kind of thing. And then David's hearing it. As he steps, he can hear the mockery. He can hear the doubt and the disgust. Verse 41, and the Philistine, he sees David, and he moves forward, and he came near him with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and he saw David, he disdained him. It's such strong language. For he was but a youth. He was ruddy and handsome in appearance, but he was a youth. The Philistine said to David, am I a dog? Like you can imagine the armies of Israel even more afraid now, because now the dude's really ticked off. Like, am I a dog that you would come to me with sticks? You came out here with a staff, bro, okay? And the Philistine, he cursed David by his gods. But those curses mean nothing, because those gods were made with hands, okay? The Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. But verse 45, David doesn't run. He doesn't stop. Don't make the mistake of thinking David wasn't nervous or David didn't have, dealing with some doubt, because faith is tough. And we've talked about this before. David says to the Philistine, though, right back, look, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you've defied this day. And this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know what? That David is the man? No, that there is a God in Israel. And that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with sword, not with spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hand. No, our hand. Do you see David's motivation? Do you see his heart as the anointed king representing his people who serve the living God? And I do wonder if there's a little bit for the first time in Goliath where he's like, you done messed up, Ron, just wondering just a little bit. Goliath boasts in himself, and David boasts in the Lord. I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. He will guide this stone, and he will guide my hands. David would write this in the Psalms later in Psalm 144. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. He is my steadfast love and my fortress, my stronghold and my deliverer. He is my shield, and he in whom I take refuge, who subdues peoples under me. So verse 48, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and he took out a stone, and he slung it, and he struck the Philistine on his forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine, and he killed him. Look, our time's almost gone, but I want to say this, okay? If we are anyone in this text, you and I are the people of Israel. That's who we are. And where teachers often go wrong in this, I want to be a David. I want to be the David in this text. But look, if we're anyone, we're Israel. We're the people who take the name of the Lord but complain and doubt and are inactive, right? And live as if the living God doesn't exist, or at least as if he has no bearing on the outcome of anything that happens. And we are the people of Israel who look at every hurdle and every obstacle from a human perspective, forgetting that we serve a living God. We're the people of Israel paralyzed by fear, unbelief, and complaining. But the good news of the gospel is that God sent a deliverer anyways. That is the gospel right there. The point of the text is not to teach you how to slay the giant of weight loss or slay the giant of debt. The point of the text is to Christ. In David, like Jesus later, God sent a deliverer to his people. And the people said, is that all you got? Do you have somebody better? Is there somebody else in the back you could pull from? Could you send someone else? We don't want a shepherd boy. We don't want a carpenter from Nazareth. We don't want a Messiah who is going to die. We want a Messiah who's going to kill the Romans and crush them. Give us Barabbas instead of Jesus. But the glorious gospel is, even though Israel scoffed at his deliverer, he delivered them anyways. Even though we scoffed at the Messiah, that Messiah went to the cross and he delivered us anyways. What a love, what a God. If I had a hanky, I'd wave it, but I'm all out today. When we sing about that, and it's the heart of our worship here, as I ran my hellbound race, indifferent to the cost, God, you looked upon my helpless state, and you led me to the cross. So hallelujah, all I have is Christ. Hallelujah, Jesus is my life. God, I confess that like Israel, I've been swallowed up by unbelief and paralyzed by fear. But the good news of the gospel is you pulled me up from the miry clay and you set my feet on a rock. David is meant to prepare everyone for Christ, for the readers, for Israel, and for all of us. God will send a deliverer, and that deliverer may not look like we think he should look. Born in Bethlehem and a carpenter, he may not deliver us in the way we think we should be delivered. Israel wanted the Romans conquered. This deliverer came through the cross, but on that cross where Jesus died, the wrath of God was satisfied. And Jesus, our deliverer, the serpent crusher, defeated death. And on that very last day, like David held the head of the giant, Jesus will hold the head of the serpent in his hand, having defeated him once for all. And never again will death touch the people of God. Never again will he torment the people of God. Never again will he curse the living God. And the universe will truly understand what it means when Jesus cried out, "It is finished." There is one hope. There's one Lord, there's one faith, right? And it's all in the person and work of Jesus Christ. And David points us straight to him. Let's go to the Lord in prayer today.